Hey, good morning. Don Taylor here with Franchise Success Partners. And today we have the pleasure of visiting with my good friend, Shirley Kefchin from FranFund. Hi, Shirley.
Hey, Don, thanks for having me.
Yes, ma'am. Today we're going to talk about SBA loans and a couple different types of SBA programs that are out there. Um, we will touch on the state of financing. We're going to touch on cash injection. A lot of people want to know how much of their own money do they need to plan on putting into their projects. And then my goal is to end today, before we end, to touch on post-closing liquidity. This is something that Shirley has taught me a lot about, and it's very important when you're looking at your project. So without further ado, Shirley, welcome, and thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm excited to share some information here about the wonderful world of funding.
She's the money lady. Everybody likes the money lady. So, Shirley, tell us a little bit about FranFund and what you guys do and how you help.
Yeah, so FranFund as an organization, we've been around for about 16 years now. And we were really created with the sole focus of bridging the gap between aspiring business owners and capital. That's quite a gap sometimes. And a lot of folks just didn't know what to look for or where to look or what was even possible. So, FranFund was really formed to, again, just bridge that gap and make SBA loans available, develop relationships with banks that like startups. And, they're comfortable with new business owners. They like new and emerging concepts. But also then we've learned, what are these banks looking for in terms of documentation? What do we need to show in a business plan or in our budget? So our goal is to really get the capital in the hands of folks so they can really make their businesses operational.
Well, let's start here. Give us an overview. What's the state of financing right now as we're kind of in this post-COVID era?
Yeah, so I think the general sentiment there is that there's a lot to be encouraged about realistically. I think if we were having this conversation last year, we probably would have been talking about a limited number of banks that are working with startups today and, maybe a little bit less flexibility in terms of qualifications and requirements. We have certainly started to see that loosen up this year, which has been great. Yeah. So the bench of banks out there that are excited about writing these loans continues to grow, which is very fun to see. And I think the other thing that's been really great is there isn't a preference in terms of what kind of business you're opening. Does it involve trucks? Does it involve a retail location that folks need to come to? The doors are sort of wide open there, which I think gives people a really good opportunity to make a decision based on the best fit, not solely based on what might be available with funding.
That's awesome. You bring up a good point. So retail concepts, right? Storefronts, we're still seeing lending happening for those.
We are. I mean, our team has loans closing every day for, fitness studios or restaurants sometimes, hair salons, right? Any of those businesses where they're really dependent on folks coming to the physical location to take advantage of goods and services. There's a lot of business to be done in that world. And, banks happy to step in and lend money.
Yeah. So for our viewers that are just unaware of SBA, can you give us just a high-level overview of what an SBA loan is and how that works?
Yes, and the reason that we hear so much about SBA loans, you don't often just hear business loan, right? You hear SBA loan most of the time when we have this sort of conversation about lending. And the primary reason for that is the money itself with an SBA loan, it will come from a bank, it'll come from a direct lending institution. It goes in the name of the business, but then the borrowers, right, the individual franchise owners sign a personal guarantee. And that basically says, no matter what happens with the business, we are personally responsible for stepping in and making these payments. When it is an SBA loan specifically, the federal government, the Small Business Administration will follow up with a secondary, a backup guarantee. And that guarantee will state that if it is impossible for the business or the individual to make the payments that they promised to, the government will step in and reimburse the bank for 75 to 85% of that balance. And so the bottom line there is when a bank can get a loan to sort of fit into the box that the SBA has created, it's basically an extra insurance policy for them. And so you do see banks being incredibly dependent on that SBA guarantee. And that's really why when you hear business loan, you hear SBA loan, because that's what the banks want to utilize.
And one of the things that I've learned in working with you folks too, and being in this role, is that it's not just the bank itself that is providing SBA loans, right? There's like a team of investors sort of behind the curtain that can be providing the money behind the loan. And then over time, they actually, I've come to learn, they get familiar with these different brands and really almost start to specialize. Like, hey, if you've got opportunities in this segment, I'm really comfortable here, and they continue to lend money there. Can you help us understand some of that?
So there are sort of two layers, right? You have the government involved. So there's kind of a set of rules and qualifications that the government wants to see folks meeting.
Right.
And then you do have all these banks and lenders across the country that will have their own preferences or qualifications in place. So it does get really interesting because you'll certainly see, certain institutions or lenders out there favoring one industry or business segment or another. Or sometimes you'll see certain banks will only lend $350,000 and above, where other banks will go as low as $200,000.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. You might have people who look exactly the same on paper, but maybe depending on where they live or depending on how much they need to borrow, what business they're moving forward with, their options could end up looking different because of all those different variables that come into play. And I think part of the reason that our team at FranFund is so successful is because we help the banks understand the different franchise brands. That is certainly a big part of it. But we also recognize that there is the risk of one bank or lender becoming oversaturated with one brand or one industry, and the SBA telling them they need to start to diversify their portfolio.
Interesting.
So, we try to kind of spread the love a little bit between some of the lenders in our network so that they know and understand these brands, but we don't run the risk of them coming back and saying, hey, we've done too much, we have to pull back right now.
And one of the benefits of working with a group like yourself, right? So if I go down to my local bank and they've got an SBA program and we walk through the process, for whatever reason, if they decide they don't want to do that, or like you mentioned, it doesn't fit in their wheelhouse, you're really a quarterback of many different avenues. So you've got a wide variety of options.
That's exactly it. And I think now more than ever, SBA lending, borrowing in general, is not a one-size-fits-all play, right? There are always unique circumstances, unique variables, whether it's on the borrower or the business side. But, those things really combine to lead us to which banks could be a good fit. And sometimes it's even that one bank is more flexible. Maybe, I know we had sort of talked about cash injection a couple minutes ago, but there might be one bank out there who is happy with someone putting in a 20% cash injection, where another bank might ask for 25 or 30%. So those are all things that we're sort of shopping for and, helping to make the fit based on.
How about the difference between a regular SBA loan and an SBA Express?
Yes, so that is a hot topic. We definitely talk about that a lot. And, I would tell you that it's sort of a baseline when we kind of compare these two programs and start to figure out what is what.
Yeah.
The SBA Express loan has a maximum loan amount of $150,000.
Okay.
And it is almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively used for service businesses, where we do not have a retail location. We are not dependent on the customer coming to us to take advantage of goods or services. Maybe we're hiring folks and sending them to our customers to provide goods and services. So that service-based business model is a good fit for this SBA Express program. The other one, the 7A loan, that is for loans, generally speaking, based on bank preference today at least, about $200,000 and above. This is the program that you would use for any sort of brick and mortar business. If we're leasing a location for our customers or our members or our clients to come to, this is also the program that we would use if we were purchasing an existing business. So maybe it's a service business, but I'm buying someone else's location. I'm not starting up a brand new location myself. Okay. Then I flip back to that 7A program.
So let's talk about cash contribution. Everybody wants to know, how much money do I have to put in? And that number seems to be flexible. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That number will look a little bit different from business to business. So if we start with that 7A program, where we're looking at a $200,000 loan and above, maybe something with a business location for folks to come to. From a timing perspective, we do not receive money from a bank until construction is starting, until you're getting your build out, your improvements ready in your yoga studio or your restaurant or whatever business you've moved forward with.
Got it.
What that means is you have to use cash resources to cover those pre-construction expenses. So for example, this would include things like paying the franchise fee to get your franchise agreement executed, getting the lease negotiated and executed, getting business insurance policies in place, getting architecture plans drawn up. Oftentimes, those expenses will roughly total up to about 20-30% of the total investment. So I would say that that's a decent estimate to use. But again, rent might be different from franchise to franchise, or how much construction needs to be done within a location. That could vary. So you will sometimes see those initial cash injections being a little bit different. Mm-hmm. I would say 20 to 30% is a pretty good range on that 7A loan.
Okay, good. So from a planning perspective, have that number in mind, and if it can be lower, great.
That's exactly right. That's exactly it. Let's plan on the high end so we're prepared. If the numbers come in lower, that's great, and we can always work our way down.
Okay. I have seen situations where cash injection can be lower. Can you give us an example of where it can be lower than that? Not that that's the norm, but
sure.
Just an example.
So, one example of where the cash injection could be lower than that is actually with the SBA Express loan.
There we go.
And the primary reason for that is with the SBA Express loan, we oftentimes do not need to lease a business location. Mm-hmm. So we don't have architecture plans or building permits that we need to get in hand. There isn't a deposit that we're paying to a landlord. So we can sort of consolidate those initial items we need to get to the franchise fee, getting our insurance policies in place, maybe securing a vehicle, maybe getting some third-party financing lined up for a truck if that's necessary. But those expenses, just generally speaking, are naturally lower than the expenses that will occur when we're starting up a more brick and mortar business.
Yep.
And so you do tend to see then that, those cash injections are maybe more like 15%, okay. Just sort of depending on where those total startup costs really land.
So before I let you go, let's talk about post-closing liquidity. Tell
us
about that.
So there are a couple of things that come into play there. Post-closing liquidity is a lender's fancy term for, we want you to have cash left over when this is all said and done. That basically they don't want to see folks taking their savings account all the way to $0 just to qualify for the SBA loan, because that just makes them nervous. What if the first year isn't perfect, right? What if we need a cushion to lean on? So with the SBA Express loan specifically, so again, these are our service businesses. We're borrowing $150,000 or less. What you're going to find the banks out there saying with this Express loan is, we would like any borrower, regardless of how much they borrow, regardless of which franchise they move forward with, we want to see that folks have about $50,000 left over available to them when this is all said and done. Now, that can be checking and savings. That can be maybe an investment portfolio, a brokerage account you have with some stocks in it. Oftentimes, lenders will give credit for retirement dollars, so 401ks or IRAs, 403bs, right? So there are different ways that we can accomplish this, but with that Express loan, banks are pretty picky about wanting to make sure that there's roughly $50,000 left over that the borrower could lean on if they really had to.
Okay, so some sort of access to liquidity that, where we can get cash and, like you said, use it for the business in the event of emergency.
That's exactly right. We don't have to take it anywhere. We don't have to use it, hopefully, right? Because our business is going to go really well. But that's what they want to see, that we have that cushion if we need it.
Is there anything else, any other updates that you wanted to give us before we wrap up today?
I mean, I would probably just encourage folks to talk to you sooner than later about funding. That don't let funding cause fear, and don't let funding hold up your process at all. There are lots of strategies out there and lots of different ways to put pieces together and make this capital available. And I think that the sooner you figure that out, the more comfortable the rest of the discovery can be, because you can really focus on the data. You're not so worried about, but how could I make this happen? So I guess, that might be my kind of final thought there is think about it and be open to talking and learning about it sooner than later. And I think you'll do yourself some favors.
Yeah, it's only a tough conversation if we make it that way. And you're absolutely right, Shirley. We've got to handle that on the front end. Establish some sort of budget. Just make sure we get all the cards on the table face up, so the candidate can do a great job on looking for a business that fits, within their profile and with, what they can actually do comfortably and do it right, do it well. So, well, thank you again for joining us today. There it is, Shirley Kepchen with FranFund, just talking about SBA loans. They do so much more, so much more. So. This will be something that I'll be discussing more with my candidates, and I'll make sure we get them plugged into your team. Shirley, thank you for everything and for joining us today.
Thank you again. We really appreciate being here and look forward to helping more of your folks along the way.
Thanks, Shirley. Take care.